The north is cold and full of whispers.
Before we go further, if you want extended lore, cutscenes, and members-only timelines that never make it to YouTube, the link to our Patreon is in the description. Dorne in the dying days of Robert's Rebellion is a country that smells like rust and hot stone. The Red Mountains hold heat the way old iron holds heat. Long after the fire beneath it is gone, long after there is no logical reason for the warmth, the stone stays warm. It does not cool. It does not apologize for this. The Tower of Joy stands among those mountains like a bad decision made permanent. 3 stories of pale rock chosen by Rhaegar Targaryen for reasons no one alive remembers now, with a single window at the very top that faces north. The window faces north. Eddard Stark climbs the stairs with blood drying in the creases of his knuckles and the weight of 2 dead men sitting in his chest, and he does not think about the window. He has spent the last 20 minutes killing 3 of the finest knights who ever lived, Arthur Dayne among them. The Sword of the Morning. Dead now in the red dirt below, dead because Howland Reed slipped a knife between his ribs from behind while Arthur was looking at Ned. And this is not a thing Ned will ever find a way to speak of, not in any great hall, not in any song, not to any man who asks how it went. His hands are shaking, not from weakness, from the sudden removal of extreme violence, the way a bowstring shakes after the arrow is already gone and there is nothing left to hold. He can hear her through the door. Not screaming. Lyanna Stark stopped screaming hours ago, according to the midwife he passed at the base of the tower. A woman he did not know, who did not stop to speak, who ran, and from the way she ran, Ned understood that there was nothing more for a midwife to do here. What he hears through the door is breathing, wet, shallow, the sound of a body working very hard at something it is already losing. He opens the door. The room smells of copper and something sweeter underneath, something he cannot name for a moment, and then names. Blue winter roses, scattered across the bed and the stone floor, brought from Winterfell's glass gardens at considerable cost, and carried all this way to Dorne, going brown at the edges now in the southern heat. They were Lyanna's request. She asked for them, and Rhaegar got them for her, because Rhaegar got her everything she asked for, which was the worst and best thing about him. The detail that Ned will carry for the rest of his life is not her face, not the blood, not what she is about to make him promise. It is the roses, going brown at the edges, the north dying slowly in a place that was never made for it. Lyanna turns her head when he enters. She is 20 years old. She looks older in the way people who have been through something enormous always look older, as though the experience has burned through the outer layer of them, and what you are seeing is not quite the face anymore, but the thing that lives behind the face. Her hair is dark and matted with sweat. Her lips are cracked through in 2 places, dried blood at the corners where she has bitten down without noticing. Her eyes are her father's eyes, her brother's eyes, Ned's own eyes, gray and clear and absolutely unwilling to be anything other than what they are. "You're late," she said. Her voice was barely enough to fill the room. "There were 3 of them," Ned said. "I know there were 3 of them." A pause, the length of 2 very careful breaths. "Is Arthur?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet, but she did not cry. Some point had passed, recently, after which crying stopped being something she had left to give. "The child," she said. Ned had not yet looked at the bundle in the corner of the room. He looked at it now, wrapped in linen that had been white and was now telling the story of the last several hours in stains. Small, breathing, eyes closed. Its face had the particular expression of new things that have cost a great deal. It looked somehow ancient. "A boy," Lyanna said. "Rhaegar's son. His father named him before he left for the Trident. Aegon. Aegon Targaryen, the 6th of his name." The name sat between them in the warm copper-smelling air and did not move. Ned crossed to the bundle and picked it up with the careful uncertainty of a man who does not hold infants often. The child did not wake. Ned looked at it. He looked at his sister. "I can't keep him," he said. Not a question. He already knew what Robert would do. He had known it from the moment he understood, riding south from the Trident with his grief and his king's orders, that Lyanna was still alive somewhere in Dorne. Robert would find the child. Robert always found the things that mattered to the people around him. It was the only consistent thing about him, this talent for locating the thing you were trying to protect. "I know you can't," Lyanna said. "That's why I made arrangements." Ned looked up from the child. "A man came," she said. 2 weeks ago. He said Rhaegar sent for him, before the Trident, from the camp at the Trident, when Rhaegar still had time to send for things. Rhaegar knew he might not come back. He always knew things like that. So he sent for this man as insurance, against the possibility of himself not returning, against the possibility of— She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. You know the House of Black and White, Ned. The Faceless Men of Braavos. You've heard the name. Ned had heard the name. The man brought a contract. Lyanna said. Rhaegar's seal, his instructions were clear. If he died if the child could not be safely kept by family, by the Starks or what remains of the Targaryens, which is nothing, then the child was to be given to the many-faced god as a ward, not as payment, not as sacrifice, as a ward, to be hidden, to be trained, to be kept alive in the one place in the world where no king's decree reaches and no soldier's search finds what is not meant to be found. She was breathing faster now, shallower. The candle on the table threw her shadow large against the stone wall. He is too important to hide in Winterfell, she said. I know you, Ned. I know exactly how you would do it. You would keep him close, claim him as yours, take him back north, and it would be the bravest and most honorable thing you had ever done, and someone would talk. Someone would see his face. Robert would find out, and then Robert would— She stopped. He needs to disappear. Completely. As if he never existed. The Faceless Men can do that. They are the only ones who can do that. Ned looked at the table. 3 objects lay on it that had not been there when he climbed the stairs. A winter rose, dried almost to dust but still dark blue, still impossibly north in this southern room. Beside it, coiled small, a single silver string from a harp, Rhaegar's harp, the one the singers wrote about, and Ned had never seen it, but he knew this was from it the way you sometimes simply know things, without being able to say why. And beside both of these, a contract rolled and sealed with red wax, Rhaegar's seal pressed deep, and above the seal a space left empty where a second name belonged. The child's guardian of record. Promise me, Lyanna said. Her voice had changed. Not weaker, exactly. More essential. The way a fire is not weaker when it burns down to its last true core, but is more itself than it has been all evening. Ned. She turned her head toward him. The effort it cost her was considerable, and she did not show it. He will be alive. That is the promise. Not that he will be happy, not that he will be safe in every moment. That he will be alive, and that someday, when he is old enough to choose, he will know who he is. The contract guarantees it. He will know where he came from. He will have proof. The Faceless Men do not take identities permanently. They teach a man to wear many faces so that he understands his own. Ned stood with Rhaegar Targaryen's son in his arms, in a room that smelled of his sister dying, looking at a contract written in the hand of a man already 3 weeks dead. He was a man who had always believed that honor was legible, that the right thing made itself known. He picked up the pen that had been left on the table beside the contract. Promise me, Ned, Lyanna said, for the last time. He signed his name. The child did not cry. Outside the window that faced north, the sky was the color of a bruise healing wrong. Lyanna's breathing had, in the time it took Ned to cross back to her and take her hand, changed into something he did not have a word for, a subtraction. The man who came for the child an hour later wore the face of no one Ned had ever seen. This, Ned would understand much later, was precisely the point. Braavos smells like salt and money, and something underneath both of those things that has no clean name. The smell of a city built on water by people who were not supposed to survive, who survived anyway and never quite forgave themselves for the relief of it. The canals are green-black in the early morning, and green-black in the late evening, and in between they are whatever color the sky decides to be, which in autumn is the color of old pewter, which is the color of a certain kind of grief. The House of Black and White sits on an island at the edge of the city like a full stop at the end of a very long sentence. Its doors are 2 halves of a single thought, one black, one white. The man who carried the child from Dorne to this island, who had worn, on the journey, no fewer than 4 separate faces in 4 separate ports, none of them his own, if he had his own, delivered the child to the kindly man at the threshold just before dawn, at the beginning of everything. The kindly man looked at the child for a long time. What was he given, he said. The man who had carried the child reached into his cloak and produced 3 things, a dried winter rose, dark blue and fading, the petals beginning to separate at the edges, a single silver harp string coiled tight as a held breath, and a rolled contract, sealed in red wax with a sigil the kindly man recognized immediately and did not react to. These stay with him, the kindly man said. Not a question. The contract specifies it. Then they stay with him. The kindly man took the child. The child did not cry. Children who have recently been through large events often don't. They spend it all at the event and arrive at the aftermath with their faces very quiet and their eyes very wide, working through something the adults around them have already decided not to help them name. He knows nothing of where he came from. He is an infant. Good, the kindly man said. We will begin there. The boy grew up in a building that was mostly silence. Not quiet, silence. There is a difference. Quiet is the absence of noise. Silence is a presence, a thing with weight, and the house of black and white had a silence that pressed on the chest the way deep water presses on a diver, evenly, from all directions, informing the body constantly that it is somewhere it was not originally designed to be. The boy grew up inside that pressure, and it became normal to him, the way all the conditions of your childhood become normal. Not because they are normal, because they are first. He was given no name. This was the first lesson delivered not as a speech but as a simple absence. There was no name to answer to. Other children in stories are given names like gifts. The boy was given the negative space where a name would have been, and over time he understood that this was its own kind of instruction. You cannot become no one if you are still answering to something. The kindly man taught him High Valyrian before Common Tongue, which meant that the language of dead dragon lords was the language in which he first learned to ask for water and to say he was cold. He learned Common Tongue second, Braavos third, the water dialect of the Eastern Docks fourth. By the time he was 8 years old, he could follow 4 conversations in 4 languages simultaneously, which was not a skill the kindly man had explicitly taught, but which the kindly man noted and filed and returned to later. What is your name? The kindly man asked him this every morning for years, until the boy understood that it was not a question. A man has no name, the boy said. What is your face? A man has no face that is his own. What does a man want? This one changed. At 5, the boy said, warmth. At 7, to learn. At 9, after the first season of poison trials, when his body had processed enough diluted widow's blood to make his hands shake for a month and flatten his vision into something two-dimensional and wrong, at 9 he said, to be finished. The kindly man did not punish this answer. He simply looked at the boy with his particular expression, the expression of a man being patient with something he already knows the shape of. Try again, he said. At 9.5, the boy said, nothing. Better, the kindly man said, though not yet accurate. The 3 objects lived in a small box of dark wood beneath the boy's sleeping mat. He was told they were his. He was told nothing else. In the early years, he took them out sometimes and looked at them the way children look at things they do not understand, not trying to decode them, just looking, absorbing texture and weight, and the particular sadness of objects that carry meaning they cannot yet release. The rose had dried to something almost translucent by the time he was 6, the petals the color of old bruises, the stem fragile enough that he learned not to touch it with more than 2 fingers. The harp string was silver and still held tension when he ran his thumb across it, a faint note, barely enough to hear, there and then gone, the way some sounds exist only to demonstrate that silence was there first. The contract he could not read until he was 7, and when he could read it, he found the sections about his origins, the sections about who had signed, what the seal meant, where he had come from, folded inward and sealed with a second application of wax. On the outside of this sealed section, in a handwriting he did not recognize, 4 words in High Valyrian, when you are ready. He put the contract back in the box. He did not ask the kindly man about it. He understood already, at 7 years old, that asking was a kind of face, and that this particular face was not one he had permission to wear yet. He was 11 when he wore a face for the first time. The face had belonged to no one living. It came from the Hall of Faces, a young man perhaps 20 with a broad forehead and eyes that had been brown before they were anything else. The kindly man walked him through the process with the same tone he used for everything, information delivered as fact, no performance of significance, no attempt to make the moment feel larger than it was. The face was a tool. Tools were not occasions. What the kindly man could not have accounted for was what happened in the boy's chest the moment the face settled. It was not pain. It was closer to reaching for something in the dark and finding it exactly where you expected it not to be, a shock of correctness in the wrong place. He had been a deliberate blankness for 11 years, and now he was wearing someone else's face, and the blankness was still there, but it had a shape now, and the shape was not his. He stood before the water basin and looked at the reflection of a dead man's face. "What do you see?" the kindly man asked. "A face," the acolyte said. "Whose face?" "No one's face." A pause. "A face that belongs to the god." "And underneath?" The acolyte looked at the reflection for a long moment. He thought about the box under his mat. A flower the color of old bruises, a note sealed shut. "Nothing," he said. The kindly man was quiet. Then, "You are lying." The acolyte said nothing. This was also an answer. "Good," the kindly man said. "A man who cannot lie to me is useless. A man who cannot lie to himself is dangerous." He moved toward the door. "We will work on the distance between those two." The years did what years do. By 13, no one could track a man through a crowded market for 4 hours and leave no impression behind, not in the minds of the people he passed, not in the texture of the air. By 14, he could prepare 9 varieties of poison from materials available in any port city in the known world, and he had built partial immunity to 6 of them through the slow-grinding, nauseating method the Faceless Men had refined. Over centuries, small doses, regular intervals, years of his body arguing with itself and consistently losing. By 15, he could walk into a room containing a target, stay 4 hours, and leave knowing more about that person than the person knew about themselves, their vanities, their specific fears, the precise category of lie they told most fluently, and why. He was not yet ready. The kindly man said this with some regularity. No one accepted the assessment without resentment, which the kindly man also noted, and which seemed to satisfy him in some way he did not explain. Then came the morning the kindly man set a letter on the table during the language lesson and said nothing about it. The letter bore a seal no one did not recognize, but his body responded to it before his mind did. Something tightened low in his chest, involuntary, the way the body sometimes responds to a smell it has no memory of but knows anyway, older than memory, older than language. He looked at the letter, he looked at the kindly man. An assignment, no one said. A beginning, the kindly man said. There is a difference. He sat across the table and folded his hands with the unhurried precision of a man for whom time has ceased to be an emergency. Before you go, there is something you are permitted to know. Not everything. One thing. No one waited. You were not a bastard, the kindly man said. The words sat between them, strange and specific, a Westerosi word in a Braavosi room. The word they would have used for you had you been raised across the narrow sea. It would have been wrong. Your parents were married, properly witnessed, before gods that recognized the vow. He let that settle. You came from somewhere specific, from someone specific. You will be permitted to know who when you have completed what is asked of you. This is written into the contract, and the contract is honored. He looked at no one with the directness he reserved for information that carried real weight. I tell you this now for a practical reason. What reason? Because where you are going, people will assign you a history. They will look at your silence and your stillness, and your lack of house words, and they will call you orphan, or runaway, or bastard, the particular word Westerosi use for children who belong to no one. The kindly man's voice did not change in register, but something behind it did. You should know, before you cross the water, that every one of those words is wrong. You belong to the many-faced God, and before that, you belong to 2 people who chose each other deliberately, at great cost, and meant it completely. No one looked at the letter on the table. That changes nothing about the assignment, he said. No, the kindly man agreed. It changes nothing about the assignment. No, one picked up the letter. It changes everything else, he did not say. He was, after all, trained. King's Landing from the water looks like a city that has been making the same mistake for 300 years, and has grown magnificent doing it. The smell arrives before the skyline does. Every sailor on the narrow sea knows this. That King's Landing announces itself through the nose first, a compound of tanner's chemicals and animal waste, and the particular fermentation that happens when 300,000 people live in too small a space with insufficient drainage, and call it civilization. Under all of that, on certain mornings when the wind comes from the right direction, something older, the char smell of the dragon pit, where the last Targaryen dragons died in their chains generations ago, the stones still holding the scorched memory of them the way old iron holds heat. He noted it. He filed it. He did not attach meaning to it. The face he was wearing belonged to a Pentoshi grain factor, middle-aged, unremarkable, with the slightly distracted expression of a man whose attention is perpetually on yield projections. He had worn this face for 6 days, long enough for the muscles of his own expression to accommodate its particular defaults: the slight forward lean, the habit of counting on the third finger before speaking, the way the eyes moved left before focusing, as if every question required a brief consultation with something only the Pentoshi man could see. He was not performing this man. He had become the useful parts of him, the parts that would get him through a gate. The gate guard at the river gate took his papers without looking at his face, which was the desired outcome. People who check papers do not check faces. He had learned this at 12, and it had been true in every city he had entered since. The Red Keep was not what he had expected, though he had trained himself not to have expectations, which meant it was precisely what it was: a large building full of people who were afraid and were working very hard not to appear afraid, which is a particular kind of exhausting that makes everyone in the building slightly too loud or slightly too quiet, nothing in between. Joffrey Baratheon had been king for less than a year. The court had not yet learned the specific texture of his cruelties, had not yet developed the particular skill of reading the weather of his moods the way sailors read the actual weather, looking for signs that were subtle and reliable and early. They were still learning. The learning was visible in the way people moved through corridors, not quickly, not slowly, but with a quality of readiness that was almost military. The readiness of people who might need to change direction suddenly and wanted their bodies to understand this before their minds had to. He moved through these corridors in the Pentoshi man's clothes with the Pentoshi man's slightly distracted expression, and was, to everyone who saw him, nobody in particular. This was the work. His assignment was simple in its mechanics. A token had to be delivered to a specific person in a specific room, at a specific hour, and the token's delivery would signal to that person that their contract with the House of Black and White had been accepted. And the accepted contract would set in motion a sequence of events that no one was not required to understand, because the House of Black and White did not explain itself to its couriers any more than a river explains itself to a boat. He knew the corridor, he knew the hour. He had 3 hours to fill before the hour arrived, and he used them the way he had been trained to use them, by learning the building. The Red Keep had been built by Maegor the Cruel, who had killed the builders when it was finished, so they could not reveal its secrets, which was the kind of logic that only works until you realize that the secrets died with them, and the building became its own mystery to everyone who came after. There were passages that appeared on no map, there were rooms that appeared on maps but not in the building, there were staircases that connected floors that were not adjacent, defying the geometry of the structure with the confidence of something that had been built by a man too powerful to be corrected. He had studied the maps in Braavos. He had also understood from the maps where the maps were likely wrong. He moved into a corridor that the map said was a dead end. It was not a dead end. The passage beyond was low and very dark, and smelled like water and old stone and something animal, the smell of a space that had been forgotten by the people who forgot that they built it. He moved through it with one hand on the wall and the other free, his breathing slow, each step tested before the weight came down. In the dark, the face he was wearing felt different. Faces felt different in the dark, more like weight than like disguise, more present and less useful. The dream arrived without warning and without sleep. This was new. This was not a thing that had happened before. It was not a dream so much as a break in the texture of the moment, a crack through which something else was briefly visible. Cold, vast cold, not the cold of a stone passage, but the cold of open northern air, the kind of cold that has never been interrupted by a building or a fire or a human body and does not know these things exist. White, not light, white, the specific quality of snow that covers everything equally and removes the distinction between ground and sky, and a sound, or the absence of a sound, the sound of nothing, the sound of a forest that has not decided whether it is breathing or not. Something enormous moved at the edge of what he could perceive, something white, with red eyes that were not threatening but were absolutely certain of themselves, the eyes of a thing that does not need to assert its right to exist. Then it was gone. He stood in the dark passage with his hand on the wall and his breathing unchanged. He had trained himself to maintain his breathing regardless, and he registered the experience with the same flat attention he gave to everything. Something had happened, the nature of which was unclear, the source of which was unknown, the meaning of which could not currently be assessed. He filed it. He continued. The room at the end of the passage was occupied. He had not expected it to be occupied. He stopped. He listened. He identified. One person seated, not sleeping, the breathing of someone awake and still and deliberately quiet, which is a very different breathing from the breathing of someone asleep. He considered the door. He considered the time. He had 2 hours remaining and no requirement to enter this room. The sensible decision was to retrace his steps and wait in a prepared position closer to the delivery point. He opened the door. A girl. She was perhaps 10 or 11, small and angular, with dark hair cut unevenly, and the kind of stillness that was not calm but was its cousin, the stillness of someone who had learned that movement drew attention and had decided attention was dangerous. She was holding a thin sword, point down, one hand wrapped around the grip the way you hold something you are not sure is enough but have decided is what you have. She was sitting against the far wall with her back to the stone and her eyes on the door. The eyes were gray, very gray, the particular gray of northern sky before snow. She looked at him and he looked at her, and between them was a moment of assessment that was mutual and professional, and extremely brief. "You're not a servant," she said. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, making an observation rather than an accusation. "I am a grain factor from Pentos," he said in the Pentoshi man's accent, with the Pentoshi man's slightly aggrieved quality, the quality of a man interrupted during mental arithmetic. "I appear to be lost." "No one appears to be lost in a passage that isn't on any map," the girl said. He looked at her with the Pentoshi man's eyes. "My mistake," he said. "I will find another route." "Not from here. You have to go back through the room with the broken column and take the third left. Not the second. The second goes to the well shaft. You won't enjoy the well shaft. You know these passages. Some of them," she said. She had not lowered the sword. "Who are you looking for?" "No one," he said. Something crossed her face. Not recognition. Something smaller than recognition, closer to the sensation of almost remembering a word in a language you studied long ago. It passed. "There's no one worth looking for in this part of the keep," she said. "Everyone useful is in the throne room or the small council chamber. Everyone down here is hiding or lost." "And which are you?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. The gray eyes were very direct. "Hiding," she said, as if this were unremarkable. "Which are you?" He produced the Pentoshi man's expression, the slight confusion, the recalibration of the mental ledger. "Lost," he said. "As I told you. Thank you for the directions." He withdrew from the doorway. Walking back through the passage, he did not think about the gray eyes. He thought about the route correction she had given him, which he tested against his memorized map and found to be accurate. He thought about the sword, which had been made for a small hand, thin, built for speed and precision in the manner that Braavosi fighting instructors preferred, though the blade itself looked northern forged, Winterfell work or something close to it. He thought about the stillness, the particular trained quality of it, the way it was not the stillness of a frightened child, but the stillness of someone who had been told by someone competent that stillness was a skill and had believed them. He thought, "She is being taught by someone." He thought, "She should not be in a hidden passage in the Red Keep, alone at this hour." He thought, "This is not your assignment." He did not think about the gray eyes. The delivery was clean. The person he had been sent to find was where they were supposed to be at the hour they were supposed to be there, which spoke well of their professionalism. He passed the token, a small disc of dark iron, the weight of a large coin, marked on one side with the symbol of the many-faced god, and on the other with nothing at all. The person took it without speaking, which was correct. Their hand, when it closed around the token, was shaking, which was also correct. People who have spent money they are not certain they should have spent on something they are not certain they should have wanted, are often shaking when the thing becomes real. He left the Red Keep through the river gate as the Pentoshi grain factor and walked back toward the harbor without varying his pace. Behind him, the Red Keep's 1,000 windows caught the last of the day's light and threw it back at the city in pieces, broken and rearranged, the way all light inside the keep eventually was, received intact, returned to something else. He did not look back. The wolf in the dream had red eyes. He noted it. He filed it. He walked. Harrenhal is the largest castle in Westeros, and also the most honest. Every other great castle in the Seven Kingdoms was built to say something about the family that built it, about the wealth behind the walls, about the particular brand of permanence that powerful people like to project at the landscape. Harrenhal was built to say the same things by a king who meant every word of it, and then a dragon answered, and now the castle says something else entirely. It says, "Nothing you build is as large as what can end it. The towers are melted at the tops, the stone fused into shapes that have no architectural name because no architect designed them. They are the shapes that happen when rock becomes briefly liquid and then remembers it is rock. The great hall is a ruin open to the sky in 3 places. The smell of char has never left the stones. It is, after 5 generations, simply part of what Harrenhal smells like: old burning, old ambition, old water collecting in the craters where ambition used to be. He had arrived 4 days ago in the face of a minor Lannister supply clerk, and the face had done exactly what a well-chosen face does. It made the guards look at the credentials instead of the man, which made the man invisible, which was the only kind of arrival worth making into a castle full of soldiers who were accustomed to violence as a first response to uncertainty. His assignment had not changed. There was a secondary task now, an addendum from the kindly man delivered through the relay of coded correspondence that the House of Black and White maintained in every port city of consequence. Observe. Specifically, observe the Lord of Casterly Rock, who had taken Harrenhal as his seat for the Western campaign, and report on the composition and disposition of his war council. Not to kill, not yet. To learn. He had spent 4 days learning Tywin Lannister. Tywin Lannister was a man who had decided, at some point in his youth, that emotion was a form of incompetence, and had spent the subsequent 60 years proving this theory by performing surgery on himself, cutting away everything that bled until what remained was functional and cold and extraordinarily effective. He ran his war council the way a maester runs an infirmary, with the understanding that sentimentality about any individual patient was incompatible with the health of the whole. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room changed temperature when he entered it, and everyone in the room understood that the change was permanent for the duration of his presence and moderated their behavior accordingly. He was, no one had concluded by the second day, genuinely dangerous. Not in the way that soldiers were dangerous. Soldiers were dangerous like weather was dangerous, massively and impersonally. Tywin Lannister was dangerous the way a very specific kind of cold was dangerous. The cold that did not feel cold, the cold that felt almost comfortable until you realized you could no longer feel your hands. He filed this. He filed everything. The filing was the assignment. The other one he noticed on the 3rd day. He was moving through the outer ward when the sense arrived. Not a sound, not a visual, but a quality of the air, a specific kind of wrongness that the kindly man had spent years teaching him to identify. The wrongness of a space that contained a skilled performance. He stopped. He looked. A man, standing near the well with a group of prisoners in neck chains, not tall, not short, not remarkable in any feature that the eye landed on naturally, wearing a face the way most people wore faces, which was to say, wearing it as if it were the only face he had ever had and would ever have, with the total commitment that came from years of practice. The prisoners near him were looking at the ground. The guards were looking at the prisoners. No one was looking at the man. No one looked at the man. The man looked back. For exactly 1/2 second something passed between them. Not communication, not signal, simply recognition, the recognition of 2 people who have studied the same curriculum and can identify each other's work the way musicians identify each other's training in the first few notes. Then the man looked away. The 1/2 second was over. Protocol maintained. He knew what the other one was. He did not know what the other one's assignment was. This was correct. Faceless men in the field did not share assignments, did not coordinate, did not acknowledge each other's presence to third parties. The House of Black and White did not send brothers to the same location without reason, but the reason was the House's reason, not his. And what was not his concern was not his concern. He continued through the ward. He did not think about the prisoners in neck chains. He thought about the quality of attention the other one was paying them, specifically to one among them, a small figure, slight, with dark hair and the posture of someone who had learned to take up less space than they actually required. He thought, she is here. He found her in the ruined section near the Tower of Ghosts, which was called the Tower of Ghosts because nobody used it, and the wind through the fused stone gaps made sounds at night that the garrison's imagination converted into something requiring a name. She was sitting on a collapsed wall, eating a piece of hard bread, with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned not to taste food, only to process it. She looked up when he approached. She recognized him. He could see it. Not in her face, which she controlled well for someone her age, but in the adjustment of her grip on the bread, the slight redistribution of weight. Her body had filed him from the Red Keep and retrieved the file now. The grain factor, she said. The girl hiding in a passage, she said. I'm not a girl, she said. I'm Ari. You are a girl named Ari, he said, and sat down on a section of wall 3 feet from her, which was close enough to speak quietly and far enough to give her options which she noticed. He had intended her to notice. She studied him for a long moment. The gray eyes moved across his face with the particular quality of assessment he had noted in the Red Keep. Not the assessment of suspicion, which was reactive, but the assessment of inventory, which was deliberate. She was cataloging him. "You're not a grain factor," she said. "I am, currently, a Lannister supply clerk," he said. "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean." She broke off a piece of bread and did not offer it to him, which told him she had resources she was not certain were sufficient, and had learned to be precise about sharing them. "What do you want?" she said. "Nothing from you," he said. "I am sitting because the alternative is standing, and standing in the open ward invites questions. I do not want questions." "So you chose me. I chose a ruined wall. You were already on it." She considered this. It was, he noted, accurate, and she had the specific relationship with accuracy that people develop when lying to themselves has become too expensive. "There's a man," she said, after a moment. She said it carefully, the way you say something you haven't decided yet whether to say. "One of the prisoners. He helped me. He did things I asked him to do, and now," she stopped. "Now he wants something in return," he said. "He said I could name 3, she said. 3 names, and they'd die." She looked at the bread in her hand. "He said all men must die." He was very still. "Valor Morgulus," he said quietly. Her eyes came up fast. "You know the words." "I know many words. In Valyrian," she said. "Not many people." She stopped again. She was, he understood, extremely intelligent, and had learned that intelligence was something to spend carefully, not display. "The man who said those words to you," he said, keeping his voice at the register of observation rather than inquiry, "is more than he appears." "I know that," she said. "Do you know what he is?" She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her deciding. "He's someone who can do things other people can't," she said. "That's enough." It was, he acknowledged internally, a functionally correct answer. She had arrived at the practical truth by removing everything that wasn't useful, which was exactly the right method and not one most people managed at twice her age. "Your 3 names," he said. "Have you used them?" "2, she said. "And the third?" She did not answer. The non-answer was specific. Not reluctance, not evasion, but the look of someone who is holding something they have not finished deciding the shape of. "Save it," he said. He did not know why he said it. It was not relevant to his assignment. It was accurate advice, and accurate advice, once observed, was difficult to withhold without feeling the weight of what it would cost the person you withheld it from. "Do not spend it on something that can be resolved without it." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because it is finite," he said, "and you are in a situation that will produce more problems than 3 names can solve. Spend resources on problems that cannot be solved another way." The wind moved through the fused stone gaps above them and made its noise, the noise the garrison called ghosts because they didn't know what else to call it. "Who are you?" she said. "No one," he said. And again, the same thing he had seen in the Red Keep, the same fractional pause, the same sensation of almost remembering something she had never known. It passed. It always passed. "That's not an answer," she said. "It is the only accurate one I have," he said. He stood. "The supply route from the Eastern Passage is less observed than the main gate after the second bell. If you were intending to leave this place with companions, the Eastern Passage would be the correct route." She stared at him. "I'm not," she started. "I didn't say you were," he said. "I said if." He walked back toward the ward. The dream came that night with more force than before. The cold was specific now. Not the cold of open space, but the cold of a particular latitude, a particular density of pine and snow, and the frozen surface of a river he could not name, but that his body apparently could, because the recognition was physical rather than cognitive, a memory stored somewhere below thought. The white shape moved closer than it had before, and the red eyes were not patient in the way they had been in the previous dream, but purposeful, tracking something, moving toward something with the certainty of a creature that does not navigate by logic, but by something older. "North," the dream said. Not in words, in direction. He woke on the stone floor of the supply clerk's requisitioned room, with his breathing even and his hands still and the absolute clarity of a man who has received information he cannot yet categorize. He filed it. In the morning he went to the Eastern Passage and confirmed that his description of it had been accurate. By the following dawn, she was gone. The girl named Ari, with 2 companions through the eastern gate into the dark outside the walls. He stood where she had been sitting on the ruined wall and looked at the piece of hard bread she had left behind, which was either an accident or a decision, and with her he was not certain the distinction existed. North, the dream had said. He turned south, toward his assignment. Winterfell on fire is a different thing from Winterfell intact, but the difference is not what you would expect. The walls still stand. The stone is too thick, too old, too fundamental to burn. What burns is the interior. The wood and the cloth and the accumulated warmth of a family that lived here for 8,000 years, all of it going up in the specific quality of smoke that comes from burning things that were never meant to burn. The smell of it carries for miles. It smells like the end of something that had believed itself permanent, which is a smell with no equivalent, because permanence, when it ends, takes with it the vocabulary you would have used to describe the ending. He had followed the smell north, not because of the smell, because of the dreams which had grown in the weeks since Harrenhal into something he could no longer file and move past. Not louder, exactly, but more specific, the way a sound becomes more specific when you walk toward its source, and the distance decreases and the details that were lost in the distance begin to resolve. Cold that had a particular latitude, snow on a particular kind of stone. Forest that was not the forest of any place he had been, but that his body recognized with an insistence that bypassed every layer of training and landed somewhere below reason. He had followed the insistence north, wearing the face of a wandering septon, which was the most useful face in a war zone, because everyone in a war zone is either actively dying or thinking about dying. And the septon's face said, "I have considered this extensively and have something to offer you regarding it." And most soldiers, even Greyjoy soldiers occupying a castle they had no particular right to, did not want to be the man who turned away a septon in a burning landscape. He had walked through Winterfell's gates 3 hours before dawn. The entrance to the crypts was in the first keep, behind a door that was old enough to predate the castle around it. The Greyjoy men had not found the crypts, or had found them and seen nothing worth taking. The dead offered nothing a living raider could use, and the iron swords laid across the laps of the Stark kings were too corroded and too old to be worth the effort of removing them. He descended. The crypts of Winterfell were long and low and cold in the particular way of places where the cold is not a condition but a constant, where it is the natural state and warmth has always been the intrusion. The torchlight he carried made the shadows move but did not make the dark less dark. It simply gave the dark texture and depth and the sense of a presence that had been here longer than light. The Stark kings sat in their alcoves and said nothing. Their faces, carved in stone by craftsmen dead for generations, had the expressionlessness of faces that have been simplified by time and the stonecutter's necessary approximations. They did not look peaceful. They did not look troubled. They looked like men who had done what was required of them and had settled into the permanent stillness of having finished. He had not come for the kings. He found the alcove at the end of the newest section, newer meaning 3 decades old rather than 3 centuries. The stonework was crisper here, the details less worn. 3 figures. A man, broad-shouldered, grave with a sword across his lap he had carried with the weight of command rather than the ease of lifelong practice. A young man, half-finished in the sculptor's execution, unfinished because the sculptor had not expected to need it so soon. And a woman. The woman's statue was simple. She had been carved young because she had been young, with her hair loose and her face carrying the quality that stone carvers reached for when they were trying to capture the kind of beauty that was not decorative but insistent, the kind that did not ask to be looked at but simply was and could not be avoided. Lyanna Stark. The inscription was brief. Beloved daughter, beloved sister. A single carved winter rose at her feet, stone rendered permanent. He stood before it for a long time. He was not certain what he had expected. He had been trained to expect nothing, and the training had taken well enough that expecting nothing had become his default relationship with future events. But there was a difference between expecting nothing and being prepared for everything, and the statue of Lyanna Stark, in the cold dark of the crypts of Winterfell, was something he had not been prepared for. He did not know why. He could not yet have said what it was that made his breathing slow and his chest do the thing it did, the thing that had no tactical name, only the name that people who were allowed to feel things called it, which was grief, though he was not certain grief was accurate for something you had never possessed and therefore could not properly have lost. He sat down on the stone floor, he reached inside his cloak and took out the box. The winter rose first. Dark blue, almost without color now after 15 years of being carried, the petals held together by habit more than structure. He set it on the floor beside him, the harp string, silver still holding its tension, still producing the faint note when his thumb crossed it, there and then gone, the sound of something that had known what it was to make music and now only remembered the shape of it. The contract last. He held it for a moment without opening it. He was aware of the weight of the sealed section, not physical weight. The sealed section was paper and wax and weighed nothing measurable, but the other kind, the kind that accumulates when something has been waiting for you to be capable of receiving it for 15 years. When you are ready, he broke the inner seal. The handwriting inside was different from the outer contract, smaller, more careful, the handwriting of someone who had written slowly, who had known the weight of each word before setting it down, who had treated the act of writing this as the most serious thing they had ever done. He read it again. The third time, he stopped at the names. Rhaegar Targaryen, Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, first of his name in this line, by the grace of the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, lawfully and willingly wed in the sight of the gods, at a sept in the hills of Dorne, in the company of witnesses sworn to honesty and silence, Lyanna Stark of Winterfell, daughter of Rickard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, given freely and with full consent, loving freely and with full intent. Issue of this union, one son born at the Tower of Joy, Dorne, in the 283rd year after Aegon's conquest, delivered of his mother at the cost of her life, living, breathing, in full health, named by his father before his father rode to the trident Aegon. Of House Targaryen, sixth of his name, rightful heir to the Iron Throne of the Seven Kingdoms, signed over to the care of the House of Black and White under the terms of this contract by his maternal uncle, Eddard Stark of Winterfell, who did so at the dying request of the boy's mother, under duress of grief and circumstance, out of love for his sister and for the child she asked him to protect, who signs here not as a man relinquishing a burden, but as a man keeping a promise, which are not always the same thing but are, in this case, both. At the bottom, below Rhaegar's seal and the Hobah sigil, a single line in a different hand, the hand of the man who had signed last, whose name appeared below it in the plain, deliberate letters of a man who wrote functionally rather than elegantly, Eddard Stark. And below that, in the smallest writing on the document, added separately, clearly later, clearly at great personal cost to the writer in terms of what it required him to feel while writing it, "Forgive me, Lyanna. I did what you asked. I do not know if it was right. I know it was the only thing I could do and still be the person you believed I was. I hope he lives. I hope, wherever he is warm." No one sat in the crypts of Winterfell with his mother's statue 3 feet in front of him and his own name in his hands. He had spent 15 years becoming no one. He had done it well. Better, the kindly man had told him on 2 separate occasions that the kindly man did not praise people than anyone he had trained in the previous 20 years. He had learned to remove himself from himself with the precision of a man who understood that identity was the enemy of effectiveness, that the self was the vulnerability through which everything else could be attacked. He had been very good at this. The contract told him, in the handwriting of a dead prince and a living uncle, and a kindly man who had known all along and said nothing because the contract said when you are ready, that the self he had spent 15 years removing was Aegon Targaryen, the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, and that his mother was 3 feet in front of him in stone, and that his mother had died asking a grieving man to write a letter about hoping her son was warm. He sat with this for a long time. He did not weep. He had not been trained out of weeping. The kindly man had no investment in eliminating tears. Tears were simply information. But there was something in him that could not yet locate the path from what he was feeling to the expression of it. The thing was too large. It had no edges he could find in the dark. He took the contract and held it over the torch flame. The paper caught slowly at first, then with conviction. He held it until the heat reached his fingers, then set it on the stone and watched it finish. The wax seal was the last thing to go. Rhaegar's seal, the 3-headed dragon holding its shape longer than the paper that had carried it, and then releasing. The smoke rose toward the ceiling of the crypts and dissipated into the dark. He picked up the winter rose and placed it at the base of Lyanna's statue at the feet of the carved stone rose that was already there. 2 roses at the feet of a stone woman in a cold room. He looked at the arrangement for a moment, then he picked the real one back up. The stone rose would last. The real one was his to carry. Some things you did not leave behind. The dream came while he was still in the crypts, which had never happened before, always in sleep, always in the boundary between states. This time it arrived whole and immediate, with no transition, in the manner of things that had been waiting long enough to have stopped being patient about it. The white shape was enormous, closer than it had ever been, close enough that he could see individual hairs of the coat, white on white on white, and the red eyes were not calm but urgent, moving between him and something to the north. Back and forth, back and forth, with the communicative insistence of a creature that understood exactly what it wanted to say and was working with the limitations of a species that had not developed language. He smelled pine. He smelled the specific cold of a forest that had never been cleared. He smelled, underneath both of those, something that he had no memory of smelling but that his blood apparently did. The smell of home, which he had no category for but which his body received like water. He came back to himself on the stone floor of the crypts, with his hand pressed flat against the cold ground and his breathing for the first time in his adult life slightly beyond his control. He regulated it, 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The discipline held. He looked at Lyanna Stark's face in the torchlight. He looked for a long time. "I read it," he said. He said it quietly to the stone. He did not know what he expected the stone to do with this information. The stone did nothing. This was correct. The stone was stone, and the woman it represented had been dead for 15 years, and the dead were the many-faced god's province, and the many-faced god did not negotiate. He stood. He put the winter rose and the harp string back inside his cloak, in the inner pocket where they had always lived, close to where a man's heart is when he is standing. He walked back through the kings of the north, past their iron swords and their simplified stone faces, past 8,000 years of people who had known exactly who they were and had built a castle around that knowledge and called it home. At the top of the stairs, before he opened the door back into the damaged castle, and the cold pre-dawn and the work that was still his work regardless of what he had read in the dark, he stopped. He said, silently, to no one present, to a name he had not had an hour ago and did not yet know what to do with, Aegon, just once, just to hear the shape of it. Then he opened the door and went back to being no one, which was the only self he currently knew how to operate, and which would have to be enough for now. King's Landing, preparing for a naval siege, has a specific quality of barely managed fear that is different from the fear of a city that has already been attacked. A city that has been attacked knows what it survived. A city waiting to be attacked does not know what it is waiting for, and the not knowing produces a particular texture of behavior in the streets. Too loud in some places, too quiet in others. The noise distributed wrong, like a body running a fever that hasn't yet broken. The harbor was the worst of it. Stannis Baratheon's fleet was somewhere on the narrow sea, and getting less somewhere every day, and the men who worked the harbor knew this with the specific intimacy of people whose livelihood required them to read water, and what they read in the water was coming this way. The chain was being prepared, the great harbor chain that would close the mouth of the Blackwater Rush and hold Stannis' ships in the killing ground. Workmen moved along the riverbanks in shifts that had stopped corresponding to day and night. The sound of iron on iron had become the city's ambient noise, the way a particular smell becomes a place's smell, inescapable and definitional. He moved through it in the face of a dock worker, a man of 50 or so, heavy in the shoulders with a rolling gait that spoke of decades on uncertain surfaces. It was a face that required physical performance as much as visual mimicry, and he had drilled the gait until it was automatic, until his body knew how to distribute its weight differently before his mind remembered to remind it. The face had 3 purposes: access to the harbor district, invisibility among the workers, and the particular social invulnerability of a man who looks like he has somewhere to be and has been going there for 30 years and resents every obstacle between himself and it. He had a meeting. The woman was sitting in a cooperage off the Street of Steel that operated on the ground floor and conducted other business in the rooms above, which was not unusual for this part of the city and was, in fact, so unremarkable as to be effectively invisible. She was perhaps 45, with a face that was forgettable in the specific way of faces that have been designed to be forgettable, not plain, not distinctive, occupying the exact center of the range of human appearance with a precision that no accident of birth could have produced. She was mending a harness when he came in. She did not look up. "The grain factor has been traveling," she said. "The grain factor has been retired," he said. He lasted 6 months. That's longer than most southern faces. She bit the thread and set the harness aside and looked at him, and in her eyes was the same recognition he had felt from the other one at Harrenhal, the recognition of shared curriculum, shared method. The kindly man sends his regards. The kindly man sends instructions. Those, too. She folded her hands on the table. Her hands were calloused in the specific pattern of someone who had spent years working with rope or leather, or who had worn hands like that for long enough that the calluses had become real. "You went north." "I was not instructed not to. You were not instructed to, either." She said it without accusation, a notation, not a judgment. The dreams. He looked at her. "The kindly man knows about the dreams," she said. "He has always known about the dreams. They began earlier than you were aware, before Harrenhal, before King's Landing. You only noticed them at Harrenhal because they had reached a threshold. They had been present since you were 12. She picked up the harness again and turned it in her hands without resuming the mending. "The wolf is northeast of here. Moving. It has been moving toward you for approximately 2 years, though it does not know this is what it is doing. Animals rarely understand the full shape of what they are doing. This is not a failing. You've been tracking it," he said. "We've been aware of it." He sat down across from her. This was outside the usual protocol for contact meetings. Contact meetings were standing matters, brief, transfer of information, departure. He sat down anyway. She noted this and said nothing about it. "You knew," he said. "The kindly man knew. What I was, what I am." "Yes. From the beginning, from before the beginning," she said. "The contract came to us before the child did. We had time to consider it." She set the harness down a second time and did not pick it up again. "The House of Black and White does not train weapons, it trains instruments. The distinction matters. A weapon serves the hand that holds it. An instrument serves the purpose for which it was made, which is a larger category than any single hand." She held his gaze with the directness of someone who has decided that what she is saying is important enough to be uncomfortable. "You were made for a specific purpose. The training was real, the skills are yours, the methods are yours, the 15 years are genuinely 15 years of work that no one gave you. You earned every piece of it. But the context of that training was not incidental." "What is the context?" he said. "The realm is fracturing," she said. 5 kings and fewer of them every season. The North is leaderless. The Lannisters hold the throne through a child who is the product of incest, and is also cruel in the specific way that produces neither loyalty nor fear, but only contempt, which is the most politically unstable of all the responses a ruler can generate. Stannis Baratheon is a capable military commander who lacks the quality that makes people follow a person rather than a position. Renly is dead. The realm needs— "Don't," he said. She stopped. "Don't tell me what the realm needs," he said. "Tell me what the contract says." A pause. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, exactly, but a recalibration. He understood that he had just done something she had not anticipated, which was itself information about what she had anticipated. "The contract between yourself and the House of Black and White is amended," she said, "effective from the date of your reading of the sealed section, which the contract specified as the trigger for amendment. The amendment is as follows." She did not produce a document. She had it memorized, which told him the amendment was either very short or very important. "Your remaining assignments will be completed as contracted. The House honors its obligations. You will complete yours. In exchange, the House amends its claim on your future service. The indefinite service term is reduced to the completion of the current assignment sequence. After that sequence is concluded, your obligation to the House is fulfilled. What you do with your time after that point is not the House's concern." He was quiet for a moment. "That was always in the original contract," he said. "Rhaegar's contract, it specified a term." "It did. The kindly man never mentioned a term. The kindly man is not in the habit of mentioning things before they are relevant." She folded her hands again. "They are relevant now. What is the current assignment sequence?" he said. She told him. The sequence had 3 parts. The first was observation. The same work he had been doing extended and formalized, covering the war's main players and reporting on their positions and intentions. The second was more specific. Access to Tywin Lannister, who had returned to King's Landing to prepare for Blackwater's defense, and assessment of a contract the House had received for his death. Not execution, assessment, who had contracted it, what their actual objective was, whether the contract's execution would serve the purpose it claimed to serve, or would destabilize the region in ways the contractor had not calculated. The third part she did not specify. "The third part will be clear when the first 2 are complete," she said. "This is the kindly man's instruction, and I don't have additional information about it. He always withholds the third thing," he said. "He says the third thing changes if you know it before you're ready for it. He says you understand this principle." He did. He had applied it himself, more than once. "The contract amendment," he said. "It releases me at the end of this sequence. To do what I choose. To do what you choose." He sat with this for a moment. Outside, the sound of iron on iron continued, the harbor chain being made ready, the city armoring itself against what was coming from the sea. "He knew," he said again. Not a question this time. Processing. He knew that a man who understood his own identity completely, not partially, not theoretically, but completely, would be more effective than a man who didn't, she said. He also knew that telling you before you were formed would have made you into something with a shape imposed from outside. He wanted you to have a shape that was genuinely yours. The training gave you that. The reading gave you the context for it. She picked up the harness a third time. These are not contradictory things. They are sequential. He should have told me, he said. He knew you would say that. Does he have a response? He said, probably. But you wouldn't have believed it at 12, and you wouldn't have trusted it at 15, and at 20 it was the right time and the right place and you found it yourself, which means it is yours in a way that nothing handed to you can be yours. She paused. He also said the rose is still with you. He said nothing. He said you'd keep it, she said. He said a man who keeps a dead rose for 15 years without knowing why is a man who knows more than he thinks he knows. He said that was always the reason you would be ready when the time came. She stood. The meeting was concluding. Tywin Lannister is in the Tower of the Hand. He receives his war council at the 3rd hour after noon. The servant's access is through the eastern corridor, which you will find navigable with your current skill set. One question, he said. She waited. The other one, at Harrenhal. He has his own assignment. Yes. She's going to name him, he said. She's going to use the third name. I told her to save it. You told her to save it for something that couldn't be solved another way. And she decided he couldn't be solved another way. She said, she was correct. He will honor the debt, and then he will leave as protocol requires, and she will be alone again, which is the condition she is most accustomed to and least suited for. She moved toward the door of the cooperage. This is not your assignment. I know, he said. He knew. The dream came while he was on a rooftop, watching the eastern entrance to the Tower of the Hand, from a position that gave him a clean line of sight and no visibility from below. It was brief this time, not less intense, but more compressed, as if the wolf had learned to make its point efficiently. Cold, white, the red eyes, and this time something else, a sound which was new. Not a howl, something quieter, the sound a very large animal makes when it has been running for a long time and has stopped and is breathing and is waiting. The sound of something that had arrived. He brought his attention back to the eastern corridor and watched the servants move in and out of the Tower of the Hand with the patient, unoccupied attention of a man who has learned to separate the part of him that was counting from the part of him that was feeling. He counted. The feeling was there regardless. He had stopped pretending otherwise approximately 60 miles north of here, in a crypt, reading a letter a dead man wrote about hoping his nephew was warm. Below him, King's Landing made its preparations for war. Somewhere in the Tower of the Hand, an old man moved pieces across a map and believed, with the particular confidence of someone who had never yet been wrong in any way that mattered to him, that he controlled the shape of things. No one watched the door and thought about the word assessment, and what it meant that the house had asked him to assess rather than act, and what it meant that the contract gave him a term, and what it meant that the term ended with him free to choose. He had never chosen anything. He was beginning to understand that this was about to change. The Tower of the Hand at the 3rd hour past midnight is occupied by one man and whatever he carries with him into the dark, which in Tywin Lannister's case is considerable. He had been in position for 40 minutes. He occupied the shadow behind the tapestry of the Lannister lion, gold on crimson, which was either the most arrogant possible choice of concealment or the most practical, since no one looks carefully at the thing they assume is only decoration. The room smelled of candle wax and ink, and the specific dry smell of old authority, the smell of a man who had been making decisions for so long that the decisions had become atmospheric. Maps covered the table. Letters covered the maps. In the center of it all, a candle that had been burning for hours and had an hour left, and in the candle's light, Tywin Lannister writing correspondence with the focused attention of a man who believed that the war would be won or lost in the quality of the letters. The assessment task had taken 6 days. The assessment conclusion had taken 6 minutes. The contract was fraudulent, not in its execution, but in its stated purpose, which claimed that Tywin Lannister's death would shorten the war and reduce the realm's suffering, and which was correct in the immediate term and catastrophically wrong in the medium term, because the chaos that followed Tywin's death, the Lannister succession crisis, the resulting power vacuum in the Westerlands, the collapse of the alliance structure that was currently the only thing preventing 5 separate wars from becoming one enormous one, would produce a body count that made the current war look like a regional dispute. Whoever had contracted the death had calculated for what they wanted and not for what would follow, which was the most common and most lethal form of bad thinking. The House of Black and White could void a contract whose stated purpose was demonstrably false. He had made his assessment. He had not left. Tywin Lannister stopped writing at the 3rd hour and 15 minutes, which was not because he had finished, but because something in the room had changed. And Tywin Lannister had survived 60 years of people wanting him dead by having a relationship with changed rooms that was faster than other people's. He set down the pen. He did not reach for a weapon. He looked at the tapestry. "You've been there for some time," Tywin said. His voice was the same at 3 in the morning as it was in the War Council. No adjustment for the hour, no accommodation of surprise. It was the voice of a man who had decided, at some formative point, that the performance of composure was less efficient than actual composure, and had worked at the actual composure until it became indistinguishable from the performance. He stepped out from behind the tapestry. Tywin looked at him. The assessment was immediate and comprehensive. Not the assessment of a frightened man cataloging threats, but the assessment of a man who cataloged everything because everything was potentially relevant. He registered the clothes, the build, the quality of stillness, the fact that no weapon had been drawn despite ample opportunity. "You're not here to kill me tonight," Tywin said. "Not a question." "I haven't decided," he said. "You have," Tywin said. "If you hadn't, you would have done it 40 minutes ago when I was facing the window and my back was to you. You don't have the look of a man who waits for conversation before killing, which means you waited for conversation deliberately." He said nothing. Tywin's read was accurate, and he saw no point in disputing accurate readings. "Sit down," Tywin said. He said it the way he said everything, as a logistical recommendation rather than a request or command, in the tone of a man who had noticed that sitting would be more efficient for everyone, and was sharing this observation. He sat. Tywin remained standing, which was also a choice. He was measuring something, establishing something. And then, with the deliberateness of a man who had decided the measurement was complete, Tywin sat across from him. Between them, the maps. Between them, the candle with its hour of life left. "Who sent you?" Tywin said. "An organization you're aware of. The Faceless Men." He said it without drama, filed and moved past. "The contract price for my death would be significant. Whoever paid it has resources." "The contract has been assessed as fraudulent," he said. Tywin's eyes moved. Not much. Just the small adjustment of a man receiving new information and integrating it, meaning you won't complete it, meaning the House doesn't complete fraudulent contracts. "And your presence here, then, is—" "Assessment," he said. "The assessment required access." "You required access," Tywin said, with the particular quality of a man who suspected he was being told the truth but was not yet certain the truth was the whole truth. "And the assessment's conclusion, that killing you in the next 6 months destabilizes 3 kingdoms, collapses 2 alliances, and produces approximately 4 times the casualties of leaving you alive. That's a very specific calculation. The House is careful with numbers." "So am I," Tywin said. He folded his hands on the table on top of the maps, with the particular precision of a man who wanted his hands visible and controlled. "What do you want?" "I told you. Assessment. You have your assessment. You could leave." "Yes, but you haven't." A pause. He reached into his cloak. A deliberate movement announced, giving Tywin the information that whatever he was producing was not a weapon. He brought out the winter rose. It was nearly translucent now, the petals the color of a sky just before snow. He set it on the map between them. He had not planned to do this. He could not have said exactly why he did it. The kindly man would have called it operational error, the introduction of unnecessary information into a controlled environment. But the kindly man was in Braavos, and something in the room had asked for the rose, and he had learned in the crypts of Winterfell that there were things in him that the training hadn't entirely reached. Tywin looked at the rose. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, which was the longest Tywin Lannister had looked at any single thing in the room. Then he looked up. His face had done something. For exactly 1 second, less than 1 second, it had done something that faces that controlled almost never did. It had shown the thing underneath. "Where did you get that?" Tywin said. "It was given to me." "By whom?" He said nothing. Tywin looked at the rose again. "The tournament at Harrenhal," he said quietly, "when Rhaegar crowned the Stark girl. Blue winter roses. She was holding blue winter roses." He looked up. "Rhaegar's son would be your age." The candle between them moved in a draft from the window. Neither of them moved with it. "You're making a calculation," he said. "I'm always making a calculation." Tywin's voice had not changed in register, but something behind it had adjusted. Not softened, nothing about Tywin Lannister softened, but recalibrated. The way a very good chess player recalibrates when they realize the board is different from what they believed. Rhaegar's son, alive, trained by the Faceless Men, sitting across from me with a blue winter rose, and the information that killing me would destabilize 3 kingdoms. He paused. "You're not here for assessment. I'm here for assessment." "You're here because you're deciding something," Tywin said, "and you wanted to see what I was before you decided it." He looked at him with the directness of a man who had no interest in performing anything at this hour in this room. "What did you conclude?" He considered the question. He considered whether to answer it. "That you understand the realm in a way that most of the people currently claiming to rule it don't," he said. "That you think in decades rather than seasons. That you are ruthless in the specific way of someone who has confused the willingness to be cruel with the willingness to be effective, which are not always the same thing." "They are frequently the same thing." "Frequently," he agreed. "Not always." Tywin's eyes moved to the rose again. "The Stark girl's son," he said. "If the Stark girl and Rhaegar were married, the reports from the Tower of Joy were never fully satisfying." Eddard Stark returned dawn to Starfall. He claimed the boy was his bastard. He was a famously honest man who told a famously inconsistent story. He looked up. "If the boy's legitimate, the boy's legitimacy is not your concern," Tywin said. "A legitimate Targaryen heir changes every calculation in this room." He gestured at the maps. "Every alliance, every succession, It changes nothing tonight," he said. "Tonight there is a candle with 40 minutes left, and a contract that has been assessed as void. That is all that is happening tonight." Tywin was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, with the deliberateness of a man making a concession he had decided was strategically sound, "What do you want?" he said again. Not logistics this time. The actual question. "I want to know if you understand what's coming," he said. "Not the war. The war is a seasonal thing. It will end when it ends. What's coming after?" Tywin frowned, the frown of a man who does not like information he doesn't already have. "Beyond the wall," he said, "there are reports." "There are reports," he agreed. "The reports are accurate. More accurate than the people receiving them want them to be." He stood. He picked up the winter rose and put it back in his cloak, against the harp string, in the inner pocket where both of them lived. "A king who understands what's coming would be worth more than a dead lion." Tywin looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the space on the map where the rose had been. "You're going to take the throne," Tywin said. Not a question, not quite an accusation. A calculation stated aloud, the way Tywin stated all calculations. For the record. He walked to the door. "Good night, Lord Tywin," he said. "You're leaving me alive," Tywin said. "I'm completing my assessment," he said. "The assessment is complete. And if I send men after you," he turned. He looked at Tywin Lannister with the particular quality of attention he had spent 15 years developing, the attention that saw everything and gave back nothing, and said very quietly, "Then the assessment will be revised." He left. The dream came on the street outside the Tower of the Hand, which had never happened in a public space, in full wakefulness surrounded by the ambient noise of a city that didn't sleep anymore. It lasted 3 seconds. Cold, white, close enough that he could have touched it if touching a wolf in a dream was a thing a person could do. The red eyes, and in them, not urgency now. Something that had moved past urgency. Something that had found its direction and was moving in it, and knew how far it had left to go, and had decided the distance was manageable. Coming, the dream said, not in words, in the quality of motion. 3 seconds, then the street again, and the sound of iron on iron from the harbor, and a city armoring itself against the wrong threat. He walked north. The third part of his assignment sequence was visible now. He had been told it would be clear when the first 2 were complete. It was clear. North of the wall, the world simplifies itself. This is not a metaphor. The land beyond the wall removes the categories that the world south of it depends on. Lord and small folk, Lannister and Stark, throne and claimant, the whole machinery of human hierarchy that requires cities and laws and the threat of consequences to maintain itself. None of that machinery functions here. Here there is cold, and there is not cold, and there is alive and there is not alive, and the distance between those 2 states is shorter than it is anywhere else in the known world. which has a clarifying effect on a person if the person survives long enough to be clarified. He had crossed at Castle Black 4 days ago, in the face of a Night's Watch ranger who had died of exposure 2 miles from the wall, and whose face he had no further use for it. The rangers at Castle Black had not questioned one of their own returning from ranging. They had, in fact, looked at him with the relieved exhaustion of men who had been expecting something worse, which told him that things worse than a single man returning from the cold had become a common expectation at Castle Black, and told him what kind of things were moving in the dark beyond the wall, and confirmed what he had been traveling toward. He had been traveling toward the wolf. The dreams had stopped 4 hours ago, not faded, not diminished, stopped with the clean finality of something that has completed its purpose, the way a fire stops when what it was burning is fully burned. He had been walking north through the gray pre-dawn, and the dreams had simply ceased to be necessary, and he had understood what this meant before he understood it consciously. The wolf was close enough now that the dreaming was redundant. He stopped walking. He stood in the snow and waited, because he had been trained to let things come to him when they were already coming, and because something in him, the part that had been awake in the dreams, the part he was learning to call by its right name, already knew the sound of what was approaching before he heard it. The snow between the trees to his left moved. Ghost was larger than the dreams had made him. The dreams had rendered him accurately in color and proportion, but had not rendered the quality of his movement, which was entirely silent, in the way of things that had been moving through deep snow for so long that silence had become structural rather than chosen. He was white in the gray morning light in a way that was not camouflage but presence, not hiding from the landscape but being the landscape's own thing, belonging to it so completely that the landscape had organized itself around him. The red eyes found him. He did not move. He understood from the dreams what he looked like to the wolf, had understood it in the way you understand a thing that exists in a register below language, in the register of blood and cold air and the particular frequency of recognition that does not require time to develop, because it was always there, waiting for the distance between two things to close. He thought briefly of what the woman in King's Landing had told him, that there had been 6 pups, once born to a dire wolf that died south of the wall in the first year of Joffrey's reign. 5 had been found and claimed by Stark children on a winter road heading south from an execution. The 6th had been there too, the white one, the quiet one, but its person had not been on that road, had never been on that road, and without its person present the wolf had not stayed. It had gone north instead, ranging wild into the cold, pulled toward something it could not have named. 2 years of running, 2 years of dreams. The wolf stopped 6 feet away. They looked at each other. He had spent 15 years learning to inhabit emptiness, to be no one, to remove every particular quality of himself that made him locatable as a self. He had been very good at this. He was good at it now, standing in the snow, looking at an animal that outweighed him by 30 pounds and had been wild for its entire life and had nonetheless walked directly to him through 6 inches of fresh snow without hesitation. The wolf was not fooled by the emptiness. The wolf did not see the emptiness. The wolf saw whatever was underneath it, the thing that training hadn't reached, the thing that had kept a dried winter rose in an inner pocket for 15 years, the thing that had sat on the floor of a crypt in Winterfell and said a name out loud to no one because the name needed to be said. He put out his hand. Ghost moved the remaining 6 feet and put his head against the hand. The contact was, he searched his vocabulary, which was extensive in 6 languages, and found it wanting. The contact was the end of something that had been in the process of ending for 15 years. It was the last word of a sentence he had not known he was speaking. It was the kindly man's lesson about emptiness requiring a vessel, made suddenly and completely physical. Here was the vessel. Here was the shape. He stood in the snow with his hand on the wolf's head and said nothing for a long time, because nothing needed to be said, because the wolf already knew everything there was to know, and because he was, for the first time in his life, in the presence of something that was entirely his, and that he was entirely himself with. And the correct response to this was not language. He found the man 40 minutes later, which was not a coincidence. Ghost had led him there with the directness of something that does not understand the concept of a detour. The man was sitting against a dead tree with his knees drawn up, and a leather sack in both hands, and the expression of someone who had decided some hours ago that he was likely to die out here and had been working on making peace with this conclusion and had not yet finished. He was large in the soft way rather than the hard way, with spectacles that had one cracked lens, and he looked up at the approach of a wolf and a man, and did not run, which told something about how exhausted he was. "Are you real?" the man said. His voice was hoarse, several days of cold hoarse. "Yes," he said. "Is the wolf?" "Yes." The man looked at Ghost, who sat and regarded him with the patient attention of an animal that had already decided what it thought of the situation. "Samwell Tarly," the man said. "Night's watch. I was with the ranging, the great ranging, they called it, the fist of the first men." He stopped. His hands tightened on the leather sack. "They came in the night, hundreds of them. Dead men walking, dead things that don't move the way the living move. And behind them," he stopped again, swallowed, "things made of cold, things that shouldn't exist. I hid, behind a rock, behind a body. I don't know, I just hid and didn't move, and they walked past me, and I thought that was the end of everything." He looked at his hands. "But they didn't stop, they just kept walking, and they didn't find me, and then they were gone." He sat down across from the man. Ghost settled between them. "Tell me everything," he said. Sam Tarly told him everything. He told it in the way of someone who had been carrying it alone and was relieved to put it down in front of another person, not composedly, not in order, but completely. The White Walkers. Their silence. The cold they carried like a personal weather. The way the dead rose behind them and moved with the same absence of hesitation. The numbers. The direction of travel. And finally, he reached into the leather sack and produced a piece of dragonglass. Raw obsidian, rough-edged, the color of deep water. "I found a cache of this buried at the fist before they came," Sam said. "Wrapped in an old Night's Watch cloak, 1,000 years old at least. The old books call it dragonglass, frozen fire. The old texts say it was used against them in the long night." He turned it over in his hands. I haven't tested it. I don't know if it still works after all this time. But I didn't throw it away. I couldn't throw it away. Something about it felt like the right thing to carry." "How much do you have?" he said. "A bagful." Sam held it out. "Take whatever you need. I don't know that I'll live long enough to. Just take what you need." He took the bag. He studied a piece of the dragonglass, its weight, its edge, the way it held no light but seemed to define the absence of it. "The old texts are not wrong," he said. He said it the way the kindly man said things that were simply true. "Stay here." They came at dusk. 3 whites, moving through the trees toward the Deadfire camp with the particular gait of things that had forgotten what it meant to have a destination, and were now simply moving toward warmth or blood or the end of whatever they had been before the cold took them. The whites did not communicate. They did not coordinate. They simply converged. Sam went for the dragonglass. He moved faster. He did not fight the whites the way soldiers fought them. Not the shoulder-to-shoulder line, not the defensive formation, not the great sweeping blades that killed and found more to kill. He fought them the way he had been taught to fight everything. Find the relevant point, and address only that. The White Walker was 40 yards back in the trees. He had identified it when they were still 200 yards out. Identified it not by its appearance, which was lost in the dark between the trees, but by the quality of the cold it produced, which was directional in a way that ambient cold was not. The whites were the hands. The walker was the mind. He went for the mind. He moved through the trees in the dark, with the absolute silence of 15 years of practice, Ghost flanking wide to his left in a movement so coordinated it should have required communication and didn't, because the wolf understood the geometry of a hunt without being told. The walker turned when he was 10 feet away, which was later than he had expected. They were cold, but they were not fast, not with the person who moved the way he moved. The dragonglass took the walker in the throat. The cold exploded outward in a radius that went through his clothes and settled in his chest like a held breath. The walker came apart, not fell, not died, came apart as if the thing that had been holding it in this shape had simply been argued out of continuing. Behind him he heard the 3 whites drop in the snow, and Ghost's movement stopped, and the forest went back to being a forest rather than a trap. He walked back to where Sam was standing with dragonglass in hand, and an expression that was working through several things simultaneously. "It works," he said. Sam looked at the space where the walker had been, at the absence where something had been, and now was not. "It works," Sam said quietly, like a man who had needed to believe something was true for months, and had just been given permission to stop hoping and start knowing. "The old books were right. Tell everyone you know," he said. "Every maester, every lord who will listen. Stop treating it as a theory and start treating it as a fact. They are coming south. The wall will hold them for a time, not forever. The realm needs to be ready before that time ends. Find the people who will and start there," he said. one person at a time. The truth doesn't require universal acceptance to be true. It requires enough people acting on it. Sam looked at him for a long moment, then at Ghost, then back. "Who are you?" Sam said. He considered the question. He had been asked this question for 15 years. The answer had always been the same. "No one," he said. But something in him, the thing that had Ghost's head against its hand, the thing that had a name it had said aloud in a crypt, registered that this answer was becoming less true by the day. He left Sam at dawn, pointing him toward Castle Black with half the dragon glass and the instruction to keep walking south and not stop for anything. Ghost watched Sam go with the patience of an animal that had already made its decision about who it was going with. He turned south. Ghost fell into step beside him, not behind, not leading. Beside, which was a position that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with the fact that some things once joined do not arrange themselves into hierarchies. The wolf dreams were gone. What had been dream was now real and moving alongside him, breathing slow in the cold morning air, its coat the color of the snow they were walking through. He would not dream of the wolf again because the wolf was here, and here required no dreaming. King's Landing was 800 miles south. Joffrey Baratheon sat a throne built from swords in a room at the end of a long hall, and he had been sitting it for too long already, and the third part of the assignment sequence was clear now. Had been clear since the Tower of the Hand, had been the shape of everything since the crypts of Winterfell, since the sealed contract, since the kindly man said, "When you are ready," and waited for 15 years and turned out to have been correct about the timing. He walked south with a wolf at his side, and a name he had not yet said aloud to anyone living. And the winter rose against his chest, and the harp string, and the cold knowledge of what was coming from the north, making everything south of the wall feel, by comparison, like a problem that could be solved. He was, the kindly man had always said, the most effective instrument he had trained in 20 years. He was beginning to understand what he had been made to be effective for. The face he was wearing was 3 days old. 3 days was the optimal duration for a servant's face in the Red Keep, long enough to establish presence, long enough for the guards and other servants to file him as familiar and stop processing him consciously, short enough that no one had yet had reason to examine the details closely. He had learned this calibration at 14 and had refined it across 8 years of field work. The first day, people look at you. The second day, you are furniture, and furniture moves through the Red Keep without generating questions. He had used the 3 days well. He knew the location of every Kingsguard on the evening rotation. He knew which of the household servants carried their own private loyalties separate from their employment, who reported to Varys' network, who reported to Cersei's, who reported to no one and simply worked, which was the rarest category and the most useful to move alongside. He knew the timing of Joffrey Baratheon's evenings, the meal, the wine, the particular cruelty he found to occupy himself after the wine, the hour at which the Kingsguard outside his private solar switched from Sir Meryn to the Hound, which was a 3-minute window with different properties depending on whether the Hound arrived early or late. He had watched the window for 2 days. The Hound was consistently 4 minutes late. He moved through the servants' corridor at the 3rd hour past sunset in a way that generated no friction with the air. The specific quality of movement the kindly man had called carrying nothing, which meant carrying no urgency, no hesitation, no quality that the body broadcast to nearby bodies through the 100 small signals that people read without knowing they were reading. He carried nothing. He was furniture delivering itself. The door to Joffrey's private solar was unlocked. Joffrey Baratheon was standing at the window when he entered, looking out at the city in the way of a young man who had been told for his entire life that everything he looked at was his, and had begun to sense recently that the city was not looking back at him with the reciprocal feeling. He was 13 years old and beautiful in the Lannister way, golden, sharp-featured, built for rooms rather than weather, and he was alone, which was the condition he was most dangerous in, because Joffrey without an audience was Joffrey without the performance of himself, and Joffrey without the performance was something worse and more honest. He set down the wine tray. Joffrey turned. The confusion was immediate, registered in the fraction of a second between recognition of a person entering and recognition of how that person was moving, which was wrong, which was not the movement of a servant, which was the movement of something with different intentions than a servant had. "You're not," Joffrey started. He removed the face. This was not a metaphor. This was the thing that faceless men did that defied the categories most people applied to the world, the thing that made witnesses doubt their own eyes and then stop doubting and start being terrified. He stood in Joffrey's solar in his own face, the face he had been born with, the face that no one in Westeros had ever seen, the face that was his mother's long jaw and his father's particular set to the eyes, and looked at the king. Joffrey's face did several things in rapid sequence: confusion, the specific fear of someone who has encountered something their categories cannot contain, an attempt to recover the performance of fearlessness, which lasted approximately 1 second. "Who are you?" Joffrey said. His voice was steady. He was, no one acknowledged, physically brave in the narrow sense. He would hold his voice steady while his hands went cold. "You have 3 seconds before I call the Hound, and he takes you apart." "The Hound is 4 minutes away," he said. "You have time." Joffrey's eyes moved to the door and back. Calculating, he was Cersei's son in one specific way. He thought fast when he was afraid. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you," he said. "There's nothing you have that I need. Then why? I came to correct something." He stood with the stillness of a man who has arrived exactly where he intended to be, who has been arriving here for 15 years and has no more arriving left to do. Rhaegar Targaryen died at the Trident. His wife's children were murdered in this building by men acting under your grandfather's orders. His other son, the son born at the Tower of Joy in Dorne, the son his wife asked her brother to hide, was given to the Faceless Men of Braavos before he was a week old. He watched Joffrey's face process this, saw the moment the categories began to reorganize. He spent 15 years being trained to be no one. He learned to wear every face except his own, and then he read a contract in a crypt in Winterfell and learned that the throne you're sitting was his before it was yours. Joffrey's jaw had set. The fear was still there, but something else was working on top of it now. The specific Baratheon Lannister calculation, the one that said everything can be negotiated. "A Targaryen pretender with Faceless Men training," he said. "My grandfather will want to know about—" "Your grandfather already knows," he said. Silence. "You spoke to Tywin," Joffrey said very quietly. "I assessed him. He is alive because his death serves the wrong purpose." He looked at Joffrey with the same quality of attention he gave to everything. "Yours serves the right one. You can't." Joffrey stopped. He looked at the door. He looked at the man in front of him. The calculation ran, and the calculation came back wrong, which he could see Joffrey registering. The Hound was 4 minutes away, and this man had been in the room for 30 seconds, and had not yet moved toward him, which was either extreme patience or extreme confidence. And Joffrey had spent enough time around men who killed to know which of those two it was. "What is your name?" He had been asked this question for 15 years. He had given the same answer for 15 years. The answer had been true for 15 years. It was not true now. It had stopped being true in a crypt in Winterfell. He did not reach for the training. He did not find the performance. He let it come the way it had come in the crypt. Practical, exact, the way a man states something that simply is, without requiring the world's permission to be it. "I am the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark of Winterfell," he said. "I am the blood of ice and fire. My name is Aegon." He looked at Joffrey, at the golden face, at the fear under the gold, at the boy who had ordered a better man's death on the steps of the Great Sept. "And you killed my father." The correction was clean. It was complete. It required 11 seconds. He stood in the private solar of the Tower of the Hand, in his own face, with the silence of a room that had just changed its primary fact, and the city outside the window continued to be the city. The noise of 300,000 people going about the business of being alive, indifferent to the specific subtraction that had just occurred inside this room, and something in him that had been in motion for 15 years came to rest. I, he thought, not no one, not a man, not he, the careful third-person distance the kindly man had built into his language to protect him from the weight of his own particularity. I am standing in the room where Elia Martell's children were brought to die. I am standing in the building where my father's dynasty ended. I am standing in the city that Robert Baratheon rode into on a dead man's throne and called his own. I have been here before. 3 days ago in a servant's face, months ago as a Pentoshi grain factor, before that, in the dark of the passages no one maps. I have been moving through the city for the better part of a year, and it has never known what I was. It will know. Not tonight. Tonight it knows nothing. Tonight there is only this room and this correction and the particular stillness that follows a thing being done that needed doing. My name is Aegon Targaryen. I said it aloud for the second time in my life. The first time was in a crypt, to stone to the face of a woman who cannot hear. This time was to the person who most needed to hear it, even if the hearing came a moment before the end of the hearing. I do not feel what I expected to feel. I expected something larger, the resolution of 15 years of becoming, collapsing into a single moment of consequence. What I feel instead is smaller and more durable than that. What I feel is correct, the word that means the thing is in the right place. I am in the right place. I have been in the wrong place for 15 years, wearing the right training. He reached into his cloak. The winter rose was there, had always been there, the specific weight of it familiar to his hand before his hand closed around it. He took it out. He looked at it, dark blue, nearly dust, preserved by 15 years of being carried by someone who did not yet know why. He crouched beside what had been Joffrey Baratheon and placed the rose on the floor. He stayed there for a moment. He looked at it, the rose that had been in a tower in Dorne, the rose that had been in the inner pocket of every coat he had worn across every country he had operated in for 8 years. The rose that was the north carried south, the thing that didn't belong in any of the places it had been. He picked it up. Some things you did not leave behind. He walked out of the solar. He walked down the corridor in his own face, which was the only face he had left tonight. The performance was exhausted, the servant's skin dissolved, the grain factor and the supply clerk and the wandering septon all filed and finished. He walked through the Red Keep as himself, which was an extraordinary risk and a thing he was entirely unconcerned about. Because the Keep's attention was distributed wrong for his purposes, guards looking outward for Stannis' fleet, servants moving with the desperate focus of people responding to a war on multiple fronts, no one looking at a man walking through an internal corridor with the quiet purposefulness of someone who knows where he's going. The Hound passed him in the stairwell. The Hound looked at him. He was a perceptive man in the way that men who have spent their lives around violence were perceptive, reading bodies, reading movement, reading the quality of another person's readiness. He looked at the face he didn't recognize and the quality of movement that wasn't performing anything, and something in the Hound's expression said that he had registered something wrong, something that didn't fit, something he was going to examine as soon as he'd completed whatever he was on his way to do. He nodded. The Hound, after a fractional pause, nodded back. He continued down the stairs. Behind him, approximately 45 seconds later, the sound of the Hound's footsteps stopped. He was already through the servant's entrance. Ghost was where he had left him, in the shadow of the outer wall, at the base of the dry moat, in a position that kept him below sightlines and gave him 3 directions of egress. The wolf stood when he emerged from the postern gate and fell into pace beside him without ceremony, in the manner of a thing that had been waiting and had now stopped waiting, which was the most complete form of trust he had ever been shown. He walked through King's Landing with a direwolf and his own face, and the winter rose in his cloak and the harp string, and a name he had said aloud twice now and would say again, soon, in a room at the end of a hall he had been walking toward without knowing it for 15 years. The Iron Throne was 3 minutes north of him. He was ready for it tonight. He was ready for it in the way that a man is ready for a thing when the thing has become inevitable. Not prepared for the details, but prepared in the fundamental sense, the sense that meant the question of whether had been resolved and what remained was only the question of when. Tonight, the city did not yet know. Tomorrow it would begin to, "My name is Aegon," he thought, walking. "My name is Aegon Targaryen. I am Lyanna's son. I am the blood of a man who played the harp and loved a northern girl and rode to a battle he knew he might not survive, and died on Robert Baratheon's hammer caring about something larger than himself. I have been trained to be no one. I know now what no one was always for." The throne room of the Red Keep is almost never truly empty. This is the first thing he registers when he enters, the absence. Not of people specifically, but of the particular pressure that people create when they occupy a high-stakes space in large numbers. The ambient current of ambition and performance and fear that fills throne rooms the way water fills a vessel, completely, without gaps. The room is 90 feet high at its peaked ceiling, and long enough that the far end dims despite the torches in their brackets, and tonight it contains only him, and the torches, and the throne. The battle for the harbor has pulled the castle's attention outward. Guards redistributed to walls and gates, the keep's resources oriented toward Stannis' fleet, and the chain and the fire that is coming from the water. In the scramble of a city bracing for siege, large ceremonial spaces are the first to be abandoned. No one stands guard over ceremony when there is a real crisis in the harbor. The throne room has been left to itself, as throne rooms sometimes are when the men who occupy them are needed elsewhere. He approaches it slowly, in the manner he had been taught to approach everything. Without reverence, without theatrics, with the evaluating attention of a man taking the measure of an object before deciding his relationship to it. The kindly man had applied this same attention to faces, to cities, to problems, to everything observable, on the basis that all things had properties, and properties accurately read told you what you needed to know. The Iron Throne's properties, monstrous, jagged, built from the swords of 1,000 defeated enemies, melted and fused by dragon fire into a shape that was never intended for comfort. Aegon the Conqueror had designed it to cut those who sat carelessly. A king should never sit easy, he had believed, and so he built a throne that enforced this belief in iron, in perpetuity, indifferent to the quality of the man who sat it. It had drawn blood from good kings and bad kings for 3 centuries without distinguishing between them. It was not beautiful. It was not meant to be beautiful. It was meant to mean something, and it meant something, and the meaning had been feeding on the realm for 300 years. He sat down on the steps, before it, not on it. On the steps, the cold stone of the dais, where supplicants stood when they came before a king. He sat in the petitioner's position and reached into his cloak. He laid the 3 objects on the stone. The winter rose, dark blue, translucent now, its petals held together by 15 years of being carried with care, preserved by nothing more than the deliberateness of the carrying. The harp string, silver, coiled against his palm with the faint tension of something that still remembered being taught. And the House of Black and White contract, his assignment contract, its work completed, the debt paid, not yet formally returned as fulfilled, which meant he was still technically on the house's time. He looked at them on the cold stone. I have been, he thought. And the thinking was I now had been in since the room where Joffrey Baratheon stopped being a problem, strange in the way of a fit, that was correct but unfamiliar, a coat that would need time to break in. I have been an infant in a dying woman's arms, a gift carried across the narrow sea, a secret, an initiate who did not know what he was being initiated into. No one, again, a ghost in cities I was not supposed to inhabit, an observer who was told observation was the work and believed it, a man in a crypt reading by torchlight, learning that his name was not the name he had been given, a man with a name, an executioner. I am all of these things simultaneously, none of them completely. The training's central paradox has resolved itself in the most unexpected direction. I cannot be no one without knowing exactly who I am. Emptiness requires a vessel. A vessel requires a shape. He said it internally, without flinching, which was the condition that had always been required. Aegon Targaryen. Jon Snow, the name I was never called, the name that would have been mine if she had asked him to keep me instead of give me away, the name that belongs to me too, in the sense that every road not walked is still yours. No one, the blood of ice and fire, Ghost's person, Ned Stark's impossible secret, Lyanna's promise kept, Rhaegar's son, he held all of it without setting any of it down. This was what ready meant, not the readiness of a weapon, sharpened, aimed, released, but the readiness of a vessel shaped by everything it had carried, arrived finally at the understanding that the carrying was the point. The kindly man had trained him toward this without naming it, the way you train a thing toward its nature without telling it what its nature is, because telling changes the shape of the arrival. He had arrived. He stood. He approached the throne, not to sit, not tonight. Tonight the throne room was empty, and the city outside it did not yet know what had changed within the last hour, and the work that remained was considerable. There were alliances that did not yet exist. There was a realm that had forgotten how to follow anything except fear, which was the most exhausting foundation a king could build on. There was cold coming from the north, that Sam Tarly had described with the specific accuracy of a man who needed the telling to be believed, a cold that no longer needed to be theorized about. He had proven the weapon that could fight it, had sent that proof south with the man most likely to make certain others listened. That cold would not wait for the politics to settle, and the realm that faced it needed to be a different realm from the one that existed tonight. He understood all of this. He also understood that the throne had one property he had not yet tested. He placed his hand on its arm. The cut was immediate. A thin line across his palm, the blade edge of swords that had been conquered iron for 3 centuries and had not forgotten what they were. Not deep, certain. Blood came up bright in the torchlight, and he looked at it the way he looked at everything, assessing its properties, integrating the information. His blood on the throne's iron in his blood. He did not remove his hand. He held it there until the contact had settled into something he could carry forward. Not a vow with ceremonial language, not a performance for witnesses, more like the completion of a transaction that had been in progress since a dying woman pressed her brother's hand in a tower in Dorne, and asked him to make a promise. The throne had been waiting for the right blood for 15 years and had now confirmed that what touched it fit the category of right, not a poetic assessment, a practical one, the throne's mechanism doing precisely what it was designed to do. He withdrew his hand. He looked at the throne for a long moment. Neither of them was impressed with the other. They were, after a long consideration, something rarer than impressed. They were appropriate to each other. He reached down and picked up the Hobaugh contract from the dais. He held it for a moment, the weight of it familiar, the paper worn at its fold from months of being carried. Then he set it on the floor of the dais and left it there, not discarded, placed with the deliberateness of a completed thing being returned to the world from which it came. The debt was paid. The many-faced god would know. The kindly man would receive the signal through the house's network, which existed in every port city of consequence, and saw what needed to be seen, and the contract would be filed as fulfilled, and no one's service would be concluded. And what he did after that point would be entirely his. The winter rose went back into his cloak, the harp string with it, against his chest in the interior pocket where both of them had lived for 15 years, close to where a man's heart is when he is standing. He turned from the throne. Ghost was in the doorway. He had been there for some time. The quality of his stillness communicated this, the absolute settled patience of an animal that had located its position and converted it from temporary to structural. The great doors of the throne room stood open to the corridor beyond, and in the corridor's dark, Ghost was white and present and real, red eyes catching the torchlight from inside the hall and returning it as something warmer than it had arrived. He walked toward the wolf. He placed his hand on Ghost's neck, in the place where the fur was thickest, where the warmth of the animal was most immediate to the hand that reached for it. Valor Morgulis, he said. He said it to the empty room, to the throne with his blood cooling on its arm, to the many-faced god who had trained him without telling him what he was being trained for, and had been correct about every part of the approach, to the kindly man 4,000 miles east, in a building with one black door and one white, to Ned Stark in the crypts of Winterfell in stone, with a sword across his lap, and a secret he had carried for 14 years because a dying woman had asked him to, and because he was the kind of man who kept his word to dying women. To Lyanna, in the same crypts with carved roses at her feet, and one real rose placed there once by the son she never held. To Rhaegar Targaryen, who had played a harp and loved a northern girl, and crowned her with winter roses at a tournament in front of everyone, and died on a river crossing believing that what he was reaching for was worth the cost. All men must die. He said it with the full understanding of a man who had been in the service of that truth for 15 years, not as comfort, not as resignation, but as the foundational fact from which everything else followed, the only truth that had never required revision. Ghost moved toward the corridor. He followed. At the threshold, the exact line between the throne room's torchlight and the corridor's dark, he stopped. He looked back once at the Iron Throne, alone in the hall, waiting as it had waited for 300 years, for a king who understood what it was. Valor Dohaeris, he said. All men must serve. He stepped through the door. Ghost moved beside him into the corridor, and they walked. One set of footsteps, one set of paws, through the red keep's dark toward the outer walls and the city beyond, and the road that ran north, and the wars that needed winning before a king could sit, and the cold that was coming from beyond the wall and would not negotiate, and the realm that did not yet know it had a king, which was the correct condition for now, which would not be the correct condition for long. Behind them, the great doors of the throne room swung slowly shut on their ancient hinges. The Iron Throne sat alone in the dark. On its arm, fresh blood. On the steps of its dais, a fulfilled contract, its work complete. In the corridor, fading. The sound of a man and a wolf walking north. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.